we end up with a net operating income that's a lot lower, and so a cap rate that's a lot lower.
And I think, Claude, this example here, I put in here seller and reality, just because, everyone's version of reality is different. The seller says, oh, no, I can manage this building for this amount and this amount. And that's really where, we talk about, this is a business. You're buying a business, and so you need to take apart, like a balance sheet, like the TSX, all that, you're doing the same thing. Real estate, there's parallels all over the place. So you take this, and you got to tear apart his books and say, the seller is not telling you everything. You need to, as hopefully a due diligence and getting a person like you to represent them, to say, no, this is reality.
Absolutely.
So let's go through some of those things if you want.
Sure. Well, I mean, some of the typical expenses that a seller is going to show are taxes, for example. It's hard to hide them. They're a big ticket item. We want to make sure they're accurate. And one of the things that we always advise our clients about with taxes is ask if they've been appealed. It's not hard to do. Doesn't cost much, if anything.
So that's that's a different one.
It's reality, but it could be a value add or a little cherry on top if the taxes are higher than they could be if you appealed them.
And getting back to that, I mean, I'm just doing a deal now where it was a piece of land, and we thought, the taxes on it are only going to be $3,000. We go to MPAC, and all of a sudden we see a phased in thing, and all of a sudden our taxes were, I think, $15,000. So what's showing as a tax this year, 2 years from now, an industrial is a long-term play, or commercial is a long-term play.
Most of the time,
well, 3 years from now, you've tripled your tax rate because MPAC, in their glorious ways, have decided to raise it. But
well, and you used the right term earlier, due diligence. I mean, that's really what it's all about. These numbers that we get from sellers, typically we're only going to get a few numbers. And as long as we see that there's some truth to it, is when we'd usually go to an LOI, a letter of intent, or an offer.
What else?
Another thing that we could see would be maintenance.
Now that, that's an open-ended question as well, because what does that mean? What does maintenance mean? Does that mean hiring the contractor, or does it is it a general maintenance fund?
And if the seller's doing it himself, or he's trading an apartment in a multi-res property to a superintendent, it means something else.
We need to. I think that when someone throws in their maintenance, we need to define what that really is, and that's like reality, because you could tear that apart and say, holy, he's not including for a reserve fund for the roof and different things like that. That's a good point.
A lot of sellers will forget to put in. So we'll put this in the reality side. They forget to include costs of advertising, vacancies, and then there is also an entry for vacancies. So those are two that they often forget.
Okay. So add for vacant, the cost of vacancy. But then, of course, when you're calculating your NOI, you need to include whatever the vacancy rate of the area is. And most guys I know are on this side, at least, it's a 1% vacancy, or whatever. But in reality,
well, and that's easy to say. If you have 5 tenants in a plaza, a small strip plaza, and they are 4 years into a 5-year lease term, most of them. You've had no vacancies. It sounds great.
Vacancies.
But what happens in a year or in 6 months when the new buyer is the landlord, and you do have some vacancies? That's something that we have to.
And you're touching on something there. I don't mean to cut you off, but you're touching on the lease structure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll just put lease term, really.
And of course, that's very interesting because we represent landlords, sellers, tenants, and buyers. Representing a tenant, if they're going into a lease, we're negotiating it for them. No, nothing yet. I'm just commenting on it.
No, but I didn't mean that. I think lease term should be over on this side, because I don't see a lot of sellers saying, oh, by the way, there's only 1 year left on the lease. More than likely, you're going to, in the reality side, you're going to have to say, hey, you got a great lease going. Oh, yeah, 10 years of great income. Yeah, in 1 year, he's gone.
Yeah, and if we're able to get, before we present a letter of intent or an offer, if we're able to get a rent roll, that's already better than most of the time. But in the due diligence phase, we would definitely be helping our clients analyze the tenancy details.
Now, I think, having looked at a lot of stuff as well, from a seller perspective, we're not trying to beat up a seller, because let's face it, buying and selling real estate is what we do. But a seller, if he includes all these little things, you or the people out there buying it would look at it and say, I'm buying this building because this guy is giving me accurate information. It's like when you're going and you're applying for a mortgage and you don't put in your SIN number, you got a mortgage app and half the stuff is missing because you're trying to hide stuff.
Sure.
It's the exact same thing on here.
I completely agree.
If you got nothing to hide, even if the numbers don't show that well, at least you know from the due diligence side,
right,
you're going to be off the
Mark,
races.
what you're saying really rings a bell with me. My partner's done several deals where we've looked at properties for buyers and we've said, this one looks good. And they said, but the numbers aren't the greatest there. And we say, yeah, but look, this guy included everything. I mean, he included the cost of the scissors to cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony of the new space.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't see that.
Yeah, that's right.
So definitely, that's very, very true.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some more. Like, what would be typical insurance? I guess.
Insurance. There is a cost there. Another big one that we have an issue with listing agents and sellers excluding or minimizing is the cost of management.
Oh, management. Okay.
Even if it's the landlord doing it him or herself or their spouse or whatever it is, there's a cost related to that.
And I guess on a lot of the smaller to medium sized, you do end up with the owner actually doing that, and he's leaving that out.
Sure.
But obviously the bigger properties, the much bigger, like a power, what they call a power center.
Of course.
You would have to have a professional property manager, and most people like that. But we're talking with investors that would like to be more hands-on.
Right.
And the truth is that doing the property managing yourself, I've always encouraged to say, if you can, and if you're so inclined, do it.
Right.
But as you get older, like myself, you just say, I'm tired of changing toilets. You know?
Well, just to make an analogy, we often, not often, but we also represent clients who are buying or selling businesses.
Right.
Every now and then. You can look at it as with a franchise. If you're running a franchise yourself and you're in that store every day running it, even if you have 2 or 3 employees, if you want to sell that franchise, that business, you're going to have to show your contribution as far as your time. You have to put a value to it.
Absolutely.
So it's the same thing in being a landlord and managing a property.
Yeah. So what else? Okay, for reality side,
there are dozens of items that we could put in there. Lawn care, snow plowing, all that kind of stuff.
You see, now that would also be part of the maintenance. And you see, that's where people can cover that kind of stuff up, right? If they know, I mean, I looked at a property once and totally forgot that, Aurelia happens to have a ton of snow.
Sure.
Not realizing the parking lot, and he says, "Oh yeah, it's included." No, it's not. I mean, you got to make the phone call, and every year the prices went up 15% because the snow plowing up there is insane. So maintenance is a bit of a tricky one.
It is.
It really is. What does that mean? And I would even want to put it on the reality side. Say you'd have to break maintenance down. Maintenance breakdown. I'll put that as well.
And the point to all this is really just to show that. A seller, like you said, I mean, they don't necessarily have to be evil people, but they're in it for themselves, just like the buyers are in it for themselves.
That's right.
So by either naivete or on purpose, they're not going to show all the expenses, and that's going to change the NOI.
Yeah. And when we talk about the seller, we're trying not to beat up the seller, but it's a buyer beware. It's a buyer beware world. I'm telling my kids, when you step out that door, you got to take care of yourself. And so in this particular situation, a seller who says, you know what, it's maintenance, it's whatever, I do my own, I got it covered. It's going to be up to the reality, which is the buyer, to say, you know what, this is how I'm going to run it, and this is how much it's going to cost me. So what else we got? So insurance, what else could we include in here, I guess? Obviously income.
Sure.
Income from rents, but that, leads us to, I guess the pitfalls of, well, how accurate is that? I mean, you got a lease, but what if there's some special deal? He shook his hand, said, here, I'll fix your garage door, and you don't have to pay me, whatever. I don't know how that works.
So like I've said a few times, what we'll do is we'll get preliminary information as much as we can quickly. If we have a good property in our sites, we don't want to let it get away.
Sure.
So within a day or two, we want to analyze it very quickly with whatever we can get from the seller and the listing agent.
Yep.
And then we go forward with an LOI or an offer. Once we have control of that deal and we go into a due diligence phase, our due diligence clauses are pretty comprehensive. So you're giving us enough time, 30, 45, 60 days, and we're asking in an offer for lots of documentation from the seller.
Of course.
As soon as we have that, definitely, we tear apart the leases, we look at them and go, hey, if I were representing this tenant, I would have tried to put an out in there where, on a 10-year lease, if he wanted to leave early after 5 years, 6-month penalty and he's off.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big problem for somebody buying, and they have to be able to understand that.
Yeah.
So it's very important to be using a qualified, in commercial real estate, a qualified commercial realtor, as well as a qualified commercial lawyer that specializes in real estate.
And I think that, extending on that, income is directly tied to the lease. And I think that studying the lease because there could be caveats. I mean, you said it earlier that the difference between multi-res and commercial is the strength of the income comes from your lease.
Absolutely.
And understanding a commercial lease is like a whole new world versus the what the tribunal tells us to do. So I think that part of understanding commercial real estate, besides everything else we're talking, is to say you got to understand contracts.
Absolutely, and every type of real estate, like I mentioned earlier briefly, has a different type of standard lease. So in industrial, you're going to get something. In retail, you're going to have certain types of things.
Yep.
I mean, you can have percentage rent. If you're coming from an industrial world, you may not even know what that means.
Yeah. Claude, once again, we're touching on so many topics here. I don't know where to go, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back on Your Money in Real Estate with Claude and commercial investing. Hey, welcome back to Your Money in Real Estate. My name is Mark Vosylius. I'm here with the good-looking Claude, and we are doing some good-looking reality stuff here. And what we're trying to do, I guess, is when we look at a commercial property in specific, because it's so unique, it's not necessarily a multi-res. There's so much room for a seller and stuff to leave out. And I think that you're just trying to say, you know what, to help some of our viewers, say, look, these are some of the things you should be looking at.
Sure.
We left off with lease, but let's continue on with a few more little.
Well, you're right. We left off with lease because of.
And that's a whole show.
Sure, it is. It is. And we talked about leases because of that's where the income comes from.
That's right.
What we're doing here is we're really analyzing income-producing properties.
Yes.
Vacant properties, we can do 2 more shows on that one.
Yeah.
But for income-producing properties, we have to be very careful. As you said, you've done this in your show before. You've analyzed cap rates.
Yep.
Just to belabor the point slightly, because you talked about income, I have a personal theory that cap rates, a lot of people think it's all about location, it's all about this. Cap rates, truly, at least half of the cap rate's value comes from the quality of the income that you're literally buying.
That's right.
And the certainty of it.
Okay.
And that's why people start going into, if you have a property at a great signalized intersection in downtown Toronto or downtown city, and you have a AAA tenant in there, well, that's great. But what if they only have 6 months left and no options?
Yeah.
You really have to be very careful about that. That's a case where we would probably say, no, we're not paying that kind of cap rate, but if we can negotiate them to sign on for longer, we'll pay a nice low cap rate for it.
It's like running a business. We got Steve on the line from Newmarket. Hey, Steve, thanks for the call. How you doing?
Oh, great, guys.
Thanks for the call. What's your question there?
Okay, my question is regarding multi-unit buildings. Let's say I found a listing for a fourplex in Toronto, and the realtor is advertising it as the rents are well below market rent. Okay, can I put in an offer and ask for a provision for the whole building to be empty when I take possession? And my intent would be to take possession, fix up the units, and re-rent them at current market rates. Is that something that your guest has done in the past?
Just to clarify, are you talking about a multi-res or are you talking about a commercial?
Well, I thought anything with more than 4 units was considered commercial.
That's the commercial component. That's from the lender side. A lender views a fourplex as a commercial loan. We're talking about commercial property as terms of buildings and lease structures. But the reason why I want to identify that, Steve, is that once you start talking about kicking tenants out, you start dealing with the tribunal. However, if we're talking about a commercial building, you're dealing with a lease, and there's no such thing as a tribunal. There's no such thing as the Ontario government stepping in and telling you how to run your building. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah, Steve, are you talking about a group of residential tenants?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
I think I was. Yeah, I am.
Right, so that's fine. I've seen that done a few times. The only way you're going to really get anywhere is if the landlord agrees to try to get the tenants to agree to leave. I don't even think that I would go to the offer stage, because it sounds like the way that they're trying to sell the property is tenanted. People are looking forward to buying the income. Like I said at the beginning of the show, there's so much demand for multi-res in Toronto and in Canada in general. They probably aren't going to have too much trouble if they're not unreasonable to sell the property. But if they are having trouble for whatever reason, approach the listing agent, approach the seller if there's no agent, and ask them, look, I want this empty. You have a feel for your tenants. I don't know them. You do. Do you think they could be agreeable to leave voluntarily? Mm. But okay. Like Mark said, I mean, to force them out is not something that you can count on. And I definitely wouldn't be buying the property that way. Yeah. And the landlord, unless he's confident that he can ask them to leave and that they will, he won't be agreeing